All right. Good afternoon once again, everybody, or good morning, depending on where you are joining us from. It's great to have you with us today. This is Family Mental Health Tips, Strategies, and a great new resource presented by the CAFÉ TA Center, hosted by our two experts, Kirsten Drybrough and Charlotte Armstrong, who I'll be introducing in just a minute. Before we get into that, I'm going to tell you a little about CAFÉ TAC, who we are and what we do, and introduce everybody we have here on the webinar today. So first of all, we are the CAFÉ TA Center. We are housed in a nonprofit organization called the Family CAFÉ, which is a grassroots cross-disability nonprofit with a national scope. We have a number of programs here at the CAFÉ. One of them is the CAFÉ TA Center, which is a SAMHSA-funded consumer and consumer-supported technical assistance center for mental health. That's a lot of words. Let me just tell you what it means exactly. Many SAMHSA-funded programs do things that are valuable, but are often clinical in focus or research-based in focus, housed in universities or other institutions. What makes the consumer and consumer-supported TA centers unique is that they are all operated by and for people with lived experience of mental health conditions. So the sensibility we bring to everything we do is nothing about us without us, as opposed to a presentation being made by people who are, experts by some measure, who are telling you things. This is a conversation with people who are walking the same path that you're walking. And we want to make sure that you understand that's where we're coming from and everything we do here at the CAFÉ TA Center and at the Family CAFÉ more broadly. If you want to know more about the CAFÉ TA Center, I encourage you to visit our website. That's cafetacenter.net. We'll be talking a bit more about that later in the program. But for now, I'll just let you know that that's where you can go to find recordings of all of our previous webinars, links to our newsletter, and basically everything we've done as a TA Center since we started in 2010 is there on our website. It's also the place to join our mailing list if you haven't already. We encourage you to do that and find the recording of today's session, which is going to be posted just as soon as it becomes available. So let me tell you a little bit about myself and my colleague John before introducing our two facilitators. My name is Jeremy Countryman. I'm the program director here at the CAFÉ TA Center. Been in that position for 13 years now. And I am a family member of people with lived experience of mental health conditions and fall into that category myself as well. I have with us today our training coordinator, John Ferrone, who is joining us from scenic Hastings, Nebraska. And one of the things that John is going to be doing, and I'm going to be helping with as well, is keeping track of what's going on in the chat and in the Q&A function. I just want you guys to know that we're very interested in your questions, feedback, comments, what have you. So at any point, if you have a question or a comment, you can either use that Q&A function or the chat to let us know. And John and I will be keeping track of that and making sure that your answers come out as a result of you putting those questions in the way it's supposed to work. So I'm very happy to welcome our facilitators today, Kirsten Drybrough and Charlotte Armstrong. Used to be Charlotte Sitnick, but now it's Charlotte Armstrong. So congratulations to her for that. These are two people from Robin Priest Live Your Truth who have a lot of expertise in family mental health and family peer support. And they are here today to review some of the important concepts they think are central to improving wellness and fostering recovery in a family unit, and also to tell you about a great new resource we have available at CAFÉ TAC that can help you do just that. So with that, it's my pleasure to welcome Kirsten and Charlotte. How you doing?
Thanks, Jeremy, and thanks, John, so much for having us, and welcome everyone to this webinar. Like Jeremy mentioned, my name is Charlotte Armstrong, formerly Sitnick. If you start to watch some of the videos that Kirsten and I created, you'll see that I have the Sitnick last name. I'm coming to you today from the west coast of Canada, and it's a beautiful day up here. I grew up down in Memphis, lost my accent because I've been living in Canada for a while. But I'm business partners with Robin Priest, who's the name of our company. And Robin brings the perspective of our business, an individual who lives with mental health challenges. And my role in our business is that of the family member. If you had met me 13 years ago and asked me anything about mental health or mental illness, I probably wouldn't know how to answer that question. And then my daughter, who I like to call my tester child, started to struggle with her mental health. She was bullied through middle school and spent most of middle school and high school wanting off this planet. And I had a real big lesson in mental health, and I started to learn about peer support. And for her, she was introduced to the power of peer support, and it was through someone with lived experience supporting her. What was missing in our family story was a family peer worker there to support me, because at the time I was really broken and fractured, and I wouldn't have told you that. I would have told you I'm fine, I've got this, and I really wasn't. And so as Kirsten and I talked today about these workshops that we created, it was through the lens of what was missing in both of our stories when life was really hard. I'm happy to say she's living in wellness. She's 28 years old and getting married in November. And I for many years thought that future would not be possible. And so I like to celebrate that, because her definition of living in wellness and mine, they differ a little bit. It's really all about her mental health. And we're going to talk about what I mean by that as we go on. But she's got a real handle on her life. And I've had some changes in my life too, in this journey of mental health. Hey, Kirsten, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. And hi, everybody. I'm Kirsten Drybrough. I too work at Robin Priest Live Your Truth, and I'm a family peer support worker. And my story is similar and a little different to Charlotte's. So in my story, and what brought me here today is many years ago, my daughter at the age of 11 started to show signs of real concern. And we spent about a decade learning a lot about mental health, learning a lot about myself and my role as a supporter. And in our family story, her mental health showed up in forms of anorexia, severe depression, some risky behavior. And ultimately, at the age of 19, she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And today, at 23, she too lives in wellness with a diagnosis and manages her own mental health and physical health. And between those ages of about when she was 11 to 21 or 20, I wasn't quite sure if we'd all make it through. And what we went through as a family, I came to learn that there are some resources out there for individuals who are struggling with poor mental health and or a dual diagnosis, but there were not resources for me as a family member. And I really struggled for a lot of years. My introduction to peer support was meeting Charlotte at a rally here in Winnipeg. I'm based in Winnipeg, at our legislative building, and it was a mental health rally. And I can remember what she was wearing. We were standing on these big steps, and I introduced myself, and we started to talk and share. And for the first time, I realized I was standing with someone who actually understood my world, had a daughter who was a little ahead of the family mental health journey than where we were at the time. But she gave me a lot of hope. And it was a lifeline that I didn't realize I needed. At that time, standing on those steps, I'd like to say I wasn't okay. My family wasn't okay. And I was really struggling. And I was looking at somebody who actually looked like they had it together and spoke very well and was actually living my world. And that's when my world started to change. And that connection made a huge impact on not only my own story, but my family's mental health story. So all the work that Charlotte and I do and why we do what we do and are so passionate about it, it's kind of from that lens of what was missing in our own family story and what would have made a huge difference back then. And to be honest, back then, I was living with a lot of shame and blame. And I was barely hanging on. And you're going to hear a little bit more about that as we move through today's webinar, and especially if you take a deep dive into our workshop series. Charlotte?
So we're not clinicians, as you've heard. We're family members, lived experience. And what we're going to share today is just a tool, a resource that can be an addition to what you're using. It's not to replace the clinical, it's just that added piece. And for me, it was that added piece of someone who had been through something similar, like Kirsten had mentioned, that was now sharing some resources, some things that worked for them. And Jeremy, I think we're ready for the next slide, and we're going to start talking about what we mean by this.
So here we have the definition of family peer support. And before we do a presentation, a webinar, we always like to define what family means to us, because what family means to us is what family means to you. And through our own family stories, we can tell you that a lot of those people that are really close to us and near and dear in our own worlds, we don't share a last name, we don't have a blood relation. So if you identify to somebody in your circle as a family member, when we use the word family, that's exactly who we are referring to. We're certainly not excluding anyone. I'd also like to take a couple of minutes here and just touch on a couple more definitions. We use the word caregiver a lot, and to us, a caregiver means somebody who's caring for, supporting, showing up for someone who's struggling with a mental health illness, challenge, or dual diagnosis. So it doesn't mean you have to all live under the same roof. It doesn't mean it has to be a child, a sibling, whatever that is. But it's just that person who's showing up for and wanting to be a strong supporter for someone who's struggling. We also use the word loved one. And this is a word that our colleague Robin doesn't like us to use, but Charlotte and I do bring that up. So if we refer to loved one, again, that's just somebody in your world that you really care about. And yeah, it could be a family member or who you identify as a family member. And the last definition I want to put out there is we're going to talk about child. And when we talk about child, it's who you identify with as having a parental role. Not only that, you know, my 81-year-old mother has a 53-year-old child, and that's me. So when we refer to child, it means anyone, you know, it could be 18 and up, youth, child, an adult, but you are going to hear that word come up from time to time. And it's if you identify as a parental role or some form of a parental role. Did you want to add anything, Charlotte?
I think we're ready to go on to the next one, Jeremy. So the parallel process is a phrase that Kirsten and I really like to introduce to families. And what do we mean by that? When one member of the family is struggling, it impacts every member of the family. But not only that, each of us bring our own mental health story to the collective family. So it's not always about the person who has the doubts, it's what our role is. And I often think back early on in my daughter's story, I was expecting her to do all the change. I was expecting her to do all that heavy lifting. And I really wasn't taking a look at what my role was in that. And back then, 13 years ago, I would have told you my role was to do whatever I could to keep my daughter alive. But my role was also to take care of myself, because I started to put my whole attention on her and I wasn't taking the best care of myself. And how that showed up was a nervous, sleepless nights, and a person that I'm so glad I'm not that person anymore, because I was so unwell. And I would have told you, I've got this. I'm fine. I'm just caring for my daughter. So that parallel process, again, is looking at each member of our family and what we each bring to our collective family's mental health story. And then that part that when one is struggling, it really does impact every member of the family. First, I know you like this
Yeah.
phrase too.
Oh, I'm really passionate about the parallel process. We also talk about when one member of the family is struggling with a mental health challenge, the entire family is struggling with a mental health challenge. And sometimes we don't realize that unless you are that person and you're in that family role. Another thing I wanted to just add to this, Charlotte, is that parallel process is recognizing that we ourselves as supporters, we have to embrace change as well. And I know for a lot of years early on in my own family story, we kind of stood back and waited for my daughter to make all the change. And she went off and she was involved in therapy and certain programs. And it wasn't until we embraced change and how we did things in supporting her that our family story changed for the better. And that's exactly why I love the parallel process. I wish I was introduced to this concept much earlier in our family story.
As we start to get more into this, if any of you have any questions as we go along, please, you can put it in the chat. You can raise your hand. We are going to do a Q&A at the end of it, but if something's coming up and you just want clarification or ask a question, by all means, please, we'd be happy to answer as we go. And Jeremy, next slide, please. So objectives. Why did we create this video series, this workshop series that you're going to the CAFÉ? And so I just put up what Kirsten and I were kind of going through at the time when we wrote these 5 workshops. And so at the high level, we always say to families is, what's happening with your youth, your adult child is truly not a result of a parenting failure. And I know that so often parents and family members are just feeling like, how did we mess up? How did we not see what was happening? And how did this, happen to our family? And there's this level of shame and blame that starts to, and when you're on social media or you're comparing what's going on at your house to, your friends or, other family members, the impact that can have on your own mental health. And when my families started to kind of fall apart, and when I say fall apart, my daughter was really struggling. I was searching for answers and I didn't know where to go. And I was carrying a lot of shame and blame. I refer to that part of my life. I went underground and I really started to isolate myself because I just didn't know where to go. And like when Kirsten mentioned when she met me, it was a game changer for her. And I know it would have been a game changer for me had I met Kirsten many years earlier too, because it was, again, that person living something similar to me. The third point, thinking about my role back then, is I was trying to fix, solve, and save my daughter, but not only her, I was trying to fix, save, and solve my youngest daughter. And my former husband at the time, as well as my parents, that was my role, is I thought I had to make life perfect for everybody. And what was the messaging back to my daughter when everything that I was doing to fix her, to save her, my message to her was, I didn't believe in you, that you had the resources or the resiliency inside of you to figure out what was best for you. And she started to be resentful for me when the choices I was making for her wasn't the right one for her. And it wasn't until I started to encourage her empowerment, to encourage her own resiliency and take more of a supporter role, is truly when I started to see change in her story. I'm going to talk about the importance of self-care. And for all of you, if you don't like that word, because it's, for some, they think about getting your nails done or a bubble bath or something like that. Kirsten talks about, for me, maintenance. I talk about my toolkit, my toolbox that keeps me in a place where I can do the best I can for myself first, and then supporting the rest of my family. But we're going to start to talk about what that looks like. And then we're going to talk about the fact that the only person that you have control of is you. And what does your role look like in your family's mental health story? You know how I mentioned I was a fixer, saver, solver. That's what I truly, that was my role. And when I started to change my role of that of a supporter, of that of a person who was encouraging resiliency in my daughter, it's when I started to see huge change in my family's mental health story. Hey, Kirsten.
Oh, I could dive right in here, but I'm going to try to resist. But I'm going to ask you a question, Charlotte. So was that a little uncomfortable? Did you have to sit in a lot of uncomfortable space if you stopped in the role of a fix, save, and solver?
I did. And, you know, and it's that boundaries word too, but the fixer, saver, solver for me was, I thought I knew what was best for my daughter's recovery story. I'm her mother. And my definition of recovery and her definition of recovery were two totally different definitions. And we're going to talk about that as we go. But it was also sitting my discomfort in allowing space for her to share with what she was telling me, what was her recovery. And we have a workshop that we created all about communication. Because back then I was listening to respond. I wasn't actually listening to her to hear what she was saying. I was already thinking about how I was going to respond to what I needed her to do in her change. And so our communication workshop that we're going to talk about shortly, when I started to embrace the power of validation, when I started to embrace listening to listen and not listening to respond, my daughter and I started to have more open and honest conversations. And I actually started to hear what her world of recovery looked like. Kirsten?
Yeah. Yeah, and mine's the same and a little different too. My sitting in discomfort and not swooping in to fix, save, and solve, where I was actually stealing her opportunity to build resiliency, was all about I had such trouble seeing my daughter in pain and seeing my daughter struggle. I wanted to take that away. So when that comes up in my own family story, you know, I felt I was helping. I felt I was doing right by her. But really, again, going back to that messaging, right? I have to do for you because I don't really feel you can do for yourself. And then not really identifying back then that to build resiliency and to feel empowerment, my daughter needed to work things out on her own and to go through some hard things. And I had to sit in my own discomfort and take a big step back. But yeah, okay. Jeremy, before I ramble on, let's go to the next slide. So these are the 5 workshops that are available to you that Charlotte and I have put together. And we've kind of narrowed it down to what we think would have made the most impact for us, especially early on in our family story. And the first one, making sense of things that don't make sense. Well, that's kind of how we both felt when things started to go sideways in our family. Just for caregivers, yes, just for you. Well, going back in time, I would have told you that I have really broad shoulders and that don't worry about me. I just need to focus on my daughter. Well, that's not sustainable. And I learned that the hard way, and you'll hear a little more about that. True connection through communication, really sharpening up your communication skills and being intentional. That would have done a world of difference for my own family, because back then I was reactive, exhausted, and certainly wasn't intentional. Looking at mental health recovery and the role of families in the recovery process. That's one of my favorite workshops. Building your parenting or caregiving confidence. Well, I know for myself, especially when I was caught up in trying to figure out where I went so wrong and how my family ended up where we were, I really lost confidence in my decision making as a parent. I was very fearful of what was going to come down the pipe next. Having a toolbox and having some skills and some go-to tools would have made a big difference in building my own confidence. And we're going to share a little bit more about these workshops. Charlotte?
Hey, Jeremy, you want to advance to the next slide? We're going to start talking about the workshop making sense of things that don't make sense. And if this is something that is happening for you right now, you're just not sure where, what's going on in your family, or you're just wanting some clarity of, hey, everything inside of me is telling me that something's wrong. This might be a workshop that you want to take a look at. So back then, when my daughter first was struggling, everything was telling me that there was something wrong. And I was bouncing her from family doctor to, the people at her school, to what my family was saying, to friends. And I was sharing my story, or bits of my story, and just trying to make sense of what was going on. In my daughter's case, and I have to say to you that when I share bits of my daughter's story, she's really proud of what Kirsten and I do. And she's allowed me to share parts of her life, because her hope is that if there's a family out there struggling, and sharing a little bit of what was going on in our family is going to make a difference for them. She wants us to, have that opportunity. So she was really struggling, as I said, with her mental health, and she was picking coping strategies that were scaring me. And I was reaching out to whoever I could to find an answer to that. And I think back then, if there had been family peer support for me, it would have helped me navigate the system a little bit better, because I didn't know where to turn. I was going to addiction organizations. I was, like I said, the doctors, the clinicians. And I wasn't getting the answers. And every time I asked my daughter to share her story with another person, it was adding more trauma on her, because she didn't like sharing her story. So this workshop is created to give you some tools around what you might need early on in your story, or maybe just now when you're starting to realize, hey, there might be a different alternative for me. We're going to talk about when, the third point, mental health challenge, illness versus something else. My daughter struggled with her anxiety, and anytime she didn't want to go to something, go to school, or participate in, I allowed her that choice of not going, because she blamed it on her anxiety. And she started to use that as an excuse to not do the dishes or help with yard work. Oh, my anxiety is too bad. And her sister started to watch and say, hey, listen, if I decide to start using that word anxiety, do I get out of doing the dishes? Do I get out of helping with the yard work? And it was allowing myself to start to realize that a mental health challenge isn't a get out of, helping around the house card. Now, there were days when she was impacted by it, but she also started to use it as an advantage to her. I remember one day when she was 15, she was saying to me, oh, I'm really, really struggling with anxiety, and I need a new iPhone, Mom. And I actually thought about getting it for her. And then I saw that look in her eye, and I thought, oh, you're using me right now. And I laugh about it now, but sometimes we as family are trying everything we can to make it better in our house. And the iPhone, I don't know, would have made it better in the house. We're also going to start to talk about that word advocacy, supporting, and enabling, and how enabling shows up in our life. So like I said, I mentioned when my daughter didn't want to participate in things, and I kind of swooped in and I helicoptered it, and I made everything what I thought was okay. I was really doing a disservice to her, because it wasn't building her resiliency. I wasn't supporting her to take some chances, to take some, just trying something different. And she started to go inward, and going out in public started to become scary for her. I think back of those early days, and if I had just really supported her resiliency, I think there would have been a lot more changes in her mental health, and she probably wouldn't have hidden as much as she did in the house. Hey, Kirsten.
You know what comes to mind with Halloween coming up is I always say this, and I think I'm very, very witty saying this, but it's true. My costume for Halloween for the last several years is I'm going out as an enabler, dressed up as an advocate. Because myself, I played that role for years. I, you know, I did for, and I kind of put it under my own umbrella as advocating for, and that she needed me too. And you know, there were some really, really hard things that we went through, especially through those teenage years up to 21 with my daughter, where I felt she needed an advocate. And she probably, all honesty, did. But I was really crossing lanes into the enabling role over and over and over again. And wow, if I could go back in time, that's probably the biggest thing I would consciously make an effort to change, was to let her do for and stop doing for her. Because I really felt badly for where she was at. It's a tough one. I'm honestly, today at 23, I'm still falling and changing lanes sometimes. Now I can recognize, especially when Charlotte reminds me, that I need to take a step back. But
You know, it's funny, for all of you, we both, Kirsten and I, we bought houses that we thought our adult child was going to live with us for our lives. And we bought houses that, I mean, each of us have our own house that accommodated that. And neither one of any of our children are living in a house now. And I didn't think mine would ever leave the city, and I would always live close to her. And she not only left the city, but she left the country. She's happily living in Mexico, living the best version of her life. And so if you're wondering, you know, what do we know? Well, we know that when we changed how we started to support our children, they went from, you know, living in our house and never leaving the house to flourishing. And Kirsten's daughter's living on her own. And like I said, mine's living a great life down in Mexico. She figured out life better than I did. I often think is she's got this great life down there, living in wellness, and you know, the beauty ocean as her backdrop. The next slide, Jeremy, please.
So this workshop, just for caregivers, is exactly that. It's for those who want to be a strong supporter, and those who find themselves or identify with finding themselves in the role of a caregiver. And again, this doesn't mean that you have to all share the same residence. This comes in different forms. But in this workshop, we're going to talk a lot about the importance of self-care and the impact that it has on your entire family. And for me, going back in time, I used to say, you know, I've got broad shoulders. Don't worry about me. I'm looking for supports and services for my daughter, and I really only need 4 hours sleep a night. And you know, that wasn't sustainable. And what happened to myself is that, you know, after the months and years went by, my wellness deteriorated. And I look back and I realized I was a fractured version of myself, especially who I am today. And that fractured, broken, reactive version, that's who was showing up, trying to be a supporter for my daughter and my entire family, to my parents, my husband, my other daughter. And for me, it took a lot for me to realize, by taking a step back and focusing on my own wellness, it wasn't selfish. It wasn't taking away from what I was putting forward for my family. It was actually a gift to them, because I showed up being less reactive, feeling more whole. And it took me far too long to understand that concept. You're going to hear us talk about duty over self. And I would have said for many years, I put duty over self. And I wish I had another family member to chat to about how that was going for me, because I wasn't okay. And there were moments I needed to put self over duty. And I learned the hard way. We're also going to talk about your own path of recovery and wellness. We're going to touch on it briefly in this workshop, and we're going to really touch on it when we talk about our recovery workshop. But basically, what we're talking about is that you have your own path of recovery. As a caregiver, you've probably seen some really hard things, experienced, if you're anything like myself, some grief, some loss of what life was going to be for you and your family. And you had your own path of recovery and wellness that you had to walk alone. And you had to put some work in to kind of grow and feel whole again. You couldn't do that while you were tied to the person you're supporting. We're also going to talk about managing shame, blame, and other negative emotions. And wow, that comes up with all the families we work with in some form or another. That shame of, failure, that shame of, my family looks different to yours. And the blame of, I really felt the first couple of years that we experienced with my daughter being unwell, that I put a lot of focus and time into figuring out where I screwed that up and what I missed and how it went so wrong. And to be honest, back then, I felt if my daughter wasn't thriving as a young person, that I was failing as her mother. I believe that wholeheartedly. And I also, that those negative emotions and that shame and blame, we're going to talk about how we perceive that externally with people around us. I had some friends with the best intentions say, gosh, if that was my daughter, I would do this. And why don't you just do this? And, that just made me feel worse. And they had no idea of what we were dealing with. I also had, that negative narrative that constantly told me I wasn't good enough or I was being judged by other people. And, to be quite honest, there were many days, if not months, that I had negative emotions and feelings about my entire family because I was feeling like I wanted to tap out for a while and get on a plane and head to Puerto Vallarta or something. And, what comes up when you feel like you've had enough? Charlotte, did you want to add anything here?
I was thinking when you said your broad shoulders comment, and I remember people asking me how I am. I put my hand up, I'm good, I'm fine. And the power of peer support for me as a family member is when you actually hang out with another person who's been through something similar and they start to share the impact of what it's been like for them caring for a family member. When my daughter was struggling, there was a lot of scary, scary nights. And I spent a lot of time fearing that tonight was going to be another one of those scary nights. And for me and my self-care is really working hard that when life gets hard for me, I don't immediately go to that feeling that we're going to have one of those scary nights again. And for some of us, it is trauma. What we've seen, what we've been through as a caregiver, as a family member supporting somebody. And sometimes that part isn't recognized. And so this workshop is really great to start to look at where you're at and where you can go with your own self-care, your own toolbox, your own me maintenance in order to take care of you. And I get excited about that one too, Kirsten. Hey, Jeremy, do you want to go to the next slide? So we talked about that communication one, and I wanted to share with you a little story of what communication used to look like in my world. Remember I talked about listening to answer? I really was only hearing about a 10th to maybe 20% of what my daughter was saying to me. Because I was really working on a rebuttal that was going to have an impact to make change on her. The other thing that would show up in communication is her time of day that she wanted to talk with me was at the end of my day. And she would come in late at night when I was barely awake because I was exhausted. And that's when she wanted to talk about what was happening for her. And I didn't have the capacity to hear that because I really was tired. And I think back that if I had just spent a little bit more time caring for myself, that in those moments of when she was ready to open up and be honest of what was going on with her, I would have been open to hear it more. So this workshop is about looking at how you communicate, how you can change how you communicate. It's about validating the experience. It's about, saying times where, if any of you are Brené Brown fans, she has an empathy video. And if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to, but it's just allowing those moments of when they're telling you what is going on for them and you don't have an answer, just saying, hey, I'm hearing that was hard for you. I'm so happy that you shared it with me. I don't know what to say right now, but I really thank you for sharing it. It's just validating what they're telling you at that moment is important. And again, I was swooping in, saving and solving. So when she would share a hard moment, I would say, oh, it's not that bad, or, just, let's have a bowl of ice cream, you'll feel better. Or, I was trying to fix her instead of just allowing her to share it with me. I came often with a furious lens. She was bullied, and I was angry at the person bullying her. So often what she was saying to me, I would have an anger undertone. It's like, oh, your day sounded horrible. I was so mad. Or I was mad at what she was saying that she had done, instead of taking a more curious approach. And it's not that there was nights when she did things that I was not happy with. And I'm not saying I said, oh, I'm glad you did that or whatever. I mean, it was just in my approach of, so you shared that you chose to do whatever. How was that for you? How did it, instead of me going, I can't believe you were so dumb, or however I chose my wording, because she would just shut down as soon as I put judgment on her when it had something to do with her mental health. It was really about supporting with understanding. And when Kirsten and I talk about that, it's sometimes we really don't understand, but asking those curious questions so that we can understand a little clearer. I'm not sure what you were saying. I don't really follow what you were saying. Can you explain a little bit more so I understand? Because it sounds like it was really hard for you. So I'm acknowledging her, in her telling me of a story, as opposed to saying, like, what were you thinking? The last point is, it's often a hard one for families, and it's tackling that S word, suicide or self-harm. One of the things my daughter chose as a coping strategy, she used to cut, and I didn't understand it. And when I started to ask her questions about it without adding shame to the conversation, I began to understand why she chose it. She shared with me it was stopping the hardness, that was the hurt that was in her head, was her choice to cut. And I always equated it with going right to the suicide word. And it's all right to ask your family member, is this something that you're thinking about? We're not putting that thought in their head. But if we can allow a space, again, curious and supporting with understanding to better understand what is happening for the person, in our family. So when I started to ask her about, is suicide something that you've been thinking about? And she said, yes. And I said, well, what does that look like for you? And she said, I just want what's going on in my head to stop. And my old way of being was immediately I was running her to the hospital without hearing what she had to say. But when I started to ask in a more compassionate, more curious way, I'd say to her, is this something that you think we should go to the hospital? And sometimes she would say, no, Mom, I just need you to be with me and let's sit through this hard time. Because right now I think that this pain isn't going to stop in my head. And if it doesn't, then maybe we should go to the hospital. The reason I share that with you is because when I didn't listen to her and I immediately whisked her off to the hospital, the doctors would come back to me and say, there's nothing more we can do for her. And she started to believe she was unfixable. But what those nights were, they were hard nights where she was really struggling. She wasn't actively suicidal at the time. She was just going through a hard time. I want to add this one point though, if everything inside of you is saying that this is I need to go to the hospital, by all means go to the hospital. You know that, everything inside of you. But it was asking for me those curious questions to see where she was at. And if your gut is still saying, we have to go to the hospital, please do so. Go to the hospital, do whatever you can. And what happened for me in my relationship with my daughter is we became closer. I began to understand what was happening in her world. And I began to understand that these strategies, these coping strategies that she chose, some of them I labeled bad back then, were her choices to get through hard times. And when I stopped being furious about them, when I stopped having anger or judgment on them and started to understand why she chose them, I also began to support her when she started to choose other coping strategies. Like we mentioned earlier on, we're going to talk about it in the next workshop. I defined her recovery different from how she defined her recovery. And again, this workshop around communication is a great way to start changing how you communicate. Because if it's not working in your family, maybe this will help change how you communicate and how you support. Kirsten, did you want to add anything to that?
You know what, I think you got it. I'm looking at our time and I'm thinking maybe we should
go to the next one.
Yeah.
Jeremy, next slide, thanks.
Thank you. And the one thing I will say is, Charlotte, wow, how much you and I have both completely changed our communication and our communication style and approach. Not only with our daughters who are struggling, but our families, and that's kind of trickled into our entire life workshop. And I also wanted to say earlier on that these workshops, you can take whatever speaks to you and watch whatever workshop speaks to you, or you can do them in order. It will work both ways. But I think once you watch one, you'll understand why it'd be great to see them all. And this workshop, Mental Health Recovery and the Role of Families in the Recovery Process, is probably, if I dare say, my favorite workshop, because it's really, really spoke to me what I wish I'd known back then. And what you will gain is an understanding of what recovery and wellness, what it is and what it is not. And some of the things we're going to talk about in this workshop is what we're going to ask you, what do you think recovery and wellness looks like for the person you're supporting? The second question is, we're going to ask you, is your idea of recovery and wellness, does it align with the person you're supporting? Now, when I was asked this question going back in time, I don't think I really had that strong conversation with my daughter, that really curious conversation of exactly what her idea of recovery and wellness would look like. And that changed everything in my family when we started to really communicate on that level. What we're also going to talk about is the foundations of recovery and wellness and how important that is. Really the concept of recovery and wellness. We're going to talk about how to stay in your role as a supporter and letting go of an agenda. And this ties back to your idea of recovery and wellness for the person you're supporting and their own idea of recovery and wellness. Well, if you come in with your agenda and what you think they should be doing and what's going to work for them, and it doesn't align with what they see their life being and what will bring them joy, what will they feel recovery and wellness looks like for them, well, that's really going to cause some conflict. We're going to talk about family recovery as a unit and what that looks like for you as an individual. I really encourage all of you to take a look at this workshop, because I'm not going to do it justice by giving the 411 speed dating version. But I will say one of the things that really changed my role as a supporter is looking at my own recovery and wellness and embracing that, and recognizing there was some grief and turmoil, and some hard things that I needed to work on and I needed to recover from. Connecting with another family member and realizing that this is a common theme within families and supporters, that really validated that, okay, I do have some work to do. Charlotte, did you want to add anything here?
You know, I was actually reading what Patricia was just writing in there, and I was thinking of medication, and I'm just going to quickly share a story. The medication my daughter was on initially, she's an artist, and it took away her creativity, and she hated being on it. And I didn't hear why she hated it. I just heard that she needed to stay on it. And it wasn't until she started to share with me, you know, Mom, I can't draw anymore. There's no creativity in me. My drawing is my life. And without this, you know, my life is empty. And they found what her and her doctor started to work together. They found something that worked for her that allowed her creativity. So remember when I talked about not listening to her, I was listening to answer. My answer was, you have to take your medication. And so, you know, Patricia, you know, here reading that outburst of medication interactions, and I often sometimes think that, are we actually listening to what the person is saying? And sometimes those outbursts are in frustrations. I lived with a house with many holes in walls when I wasn't listening because she was frustrated. Jeremy, if you want to go to the next slide, and this really for me and for Kirsten is how to build our parenting confidence, and this truly, this workshop was created with what would have made a difference when we were back in the days of when life was really, really hard in our house. And really, I want to say we do mention a couple of times that this isn't a fault of your parenting. This is just something that's going on in your house, and this is something that's happening with your child, and it's really starting to look at our own parenting patterns and how that shows up. And I'm going to share one story, and I know Kirsten has one as well. You know, for me, I really had to look at how I parented, and back then I parented a lot in fear because I didn't want it to be one of those scary nights, and I wasn't taking care of myself. And so a typical night back in my world, when my young adult daughter was living in our house, I'd get up early to go to work, and at 8:45 at night, she'd be getting ready to go out. And I would start to get upset because I knew going out would equate, I might not get much sleep. And so a lot of my interactions with her would be judgy and fear-based. And she would end up leaving in a huff. I wouldn't sleep all night. And it started to impact my job. I mean, luckily, I now work in mental health. So my coworkers would be like, oh, you didn't get much sleep last night. But back then I worked in the real estate world. I had to have my game on, and it really was impacting how I worked, how I conducted my business, and how I conducted my life with the rest of my family. So this workshop for me is really starting to look at what our patterns are, how we can work on our confidence, again, that power of validation, and how we support the resilience for our family member, and how do we foster hope. For me, that fostering hope is hanging out with Kirsten, because she brings a lot of hope to my world when life is hard. Again, that power of peer support. Kirsten's and my day job is training family peer workers to work in clinical and addiction settings all over the world. It's kind of a newer concept in North America, but but it's a real important concept because we talked like earlier in the beginning of this webinar, we talked about the parallel process. And so we spend a lot of time training family peer workers to work alongside individual peer workers. In a perfect world, every healthcare setting would have both a family peer worker and an individual peer worker, because that's just what's needed to support families, I think, in this day and age. Kirsten, did you want to add anything on this last one?
No, I will add just briefly. I just wanted to add a story. We work with so many families who, are really concerned about where their child or their adult child, really adult child, is with life, and they're not meeting those milestones. Graduating, prom, college, all of it, right? And in my family's story, my daughter didn't physically go to high school after grade 9. She did school from home on a medical leave. She also didn't get a driver's license till she was 19. She didn't graduate until she was 19. And, we have to make adjustments of our expectations and not, I shouldn't say, I don't want to, gosh, I think I'm being judgy just the way I'm sounding right now. But at the time, that brought a lot of shame to my world. And I felt very badly that she wasn't hitting those milestones. I look back and I realized that, that's my agenda, not hers. She had a lot on her plate and she did great with what she was dealing with. And, there's no social measuring stick that we should be dragging around and comparing the milestones. It happens on its own pace, and she's doing fantastic. But at the time, wow, that, this back to school time, that used to really, really weigh heavy on me. And that's something that I struggled with as well. But that's all.
I'm just going to answer Ray's question, Kirsten, then Jeremy will go to the next slide. Ray, great question about NAMI's family to family or family connections. There's lots of similarities as well. And this, for us, these workshops, you can download them at 2 in the morning when you can't sleep. You're going to get to hear Kirsten's voice and a workbook that goes along with it. You can do these workshops at your pace. It's just another resource that's available for families. And this really are about supporting you, the family members. Sometimes with NAMI, it's really about giving you tools to then parent or the person that in your family, where these are really something to support you, the family member, the caregiver. Jeremy, did you want to answer that too?
There we go. I have to be off mute, first of all. Yeah, I think that is one of the big differences, like the family to family, NAMI's family to family, and family connections, which I'm less familiar with, but I believe both of those are like in-person programs. I think you're probably going to find some overlap in terms of the content. But of course, the thing that we're trying to do here is, as you were saying, Charlotte, is make something that is available 24/7. So whenever you want to access these modules, they're there on the website. The workbook is always there. You can return to it. So it's conceptually similar in that it's, about families talking to other families. But the thing that makes this unique is the sort of 24/7 aspect of it. And I also think ours is unique in that it's really based in the values of peer support as a practice, as opposed to being sort of just an informal support group. For those who are not as familiar with the concept, people who do peer support, there's certifications for it, and there are certain tenets and principles involved in peer support that make it a little bit different than just a support group in the more informal sense. So I think that's also one of the things that's unique about our approach. It's really steeped in the principles of peer support as a recovery-based practice that exists to, empower people and is based in hearing and mutuality and some of the values that are central to the practice.
Yeah, and I was thinking too that that family connections, we know lots of families who've taken it and really enjoy the concepts around it. And in some city centers, you've got a 6-month wait to get into that course too. So this is something that you can do as you wait to get, your start in a course or workshop that you're thinking of. Again, you can download it, you can watch it 2 a.m. And you can use it until, if you're waiting to get into something else. And Jeremy, if you'd like to advance the next slide, please.
Yep.
Well, this is a slide that I always get a little excited about, the family recovery definition. First, I'm going to read it to you, and then I'm going to share with you why this impacted my own life and why I share it in my work on a regular basis. So the idea of recovery is approached from a slightly different perspective. The family member strives to recover from the emotional turmoil, grief, and/or fatigue that may result from caring for someone with a mental health challenge or illness. The family member's path to their own mental wellness or recovery is likely to be enhanced by a better understanding of their loved one's illness and through the development of more effective coping skills. Greater confidence, accepting the situation, and having hope for their loved one will help them to be more effective caregivers and supporters, while also helping them to sustain their own well-being. We refer to this as having achieved a level of readiness. And for myself, when I first discovered this definition, I felt hugely validated. It actually made me stop and feel comfortable to express that, or to be okay with not being okay, because I was not okay at the time. You'll hear me talk about grief and turmoil and things that we do experience. And I had to recognize that there was a recovery process that I had to embrace on my own. And it was a path that was only for me. It was something I had to walk alone. And I had a lot of work to do. You'll hear a lot more about what I mean when I talk about your path that you have to walk on your own in our recovery and wellness workshop. But I quite honestly have this definition handy on my desk at all times. And it's a tool that I use when I work with families, because I feel it allows us to not be okay and to recognize that we've seen some hard things as well. Charlotte, did you want to add at all here?
I think we're just going to go to the last
Sure.
the next slide, and then Jeremy's going to jump right in to start navigating the site. So again, Kirsten and I always just like to end a lot of our talks on, the only thing we can change is us. And it's really starting to look at what our role is in our family's mental health story. And I hope that you'll spend some time just looking at what Jeremy's going to show, these workshops that we've created. Again, it's through the lens of peer support. It's through the lens of lived experience. These are great resources that you can watch all the way through, or little bits. There's an amazing workbook that goes along with it. And these were things that were missing in our story, in many of the families we've supported over the years. Kirsten and I also started a nonprofit called All In Family, and it's family peer support groups for family members. It's online. It's available to anybody who wants to join. And we created these workshops with hearing what other families had wished that they knew or they had had access to. Again, this is just a resource that's available for you, the caregiver, the family member. So with that, Jeremy, I think you're on. You wanted to share your screen?
Yeah, so we've been talking a lot about these workshops and how they work. And, you know, in the webinar, we've run through sort of the content of each of the different pieces of it. So now what I'm going to do is kind of give you a view of what it looks like on the website. So what you see here on the slide on the left, that's a screenshot of what it looks like on the website. And then there's an accompanying workbook that goes with it. So I'll be showing you that in a second. So let me just switch over and share the website with you so you can see what that looks like. Okay, so basically what you're looking here is the CAFÉ TA Center website, cafetacenter.net. Anytime if you go to that website and you're trying to find where these are located, if you're on the home page and you go to this TAC trainings bar, that's every training we've done, and you scroll down and it's right here. But you can also, of course, you have the link to go there directly. So there's 5 modules included, and we ran through them here in the webinar today. And you can get to any of them from this first landing page. So what we have here, we have this introductory video where Kirsten kind of shares some of the same stuff she shared today about what the series is and what's in it. And then there are 5 modules. You'll notice that these titles here are the same ones that were on the headings of each of those 5 slides, which is not a coincidence. So each of these will take you to a different page. You can go through them in order. You can go back and forth. You can stop and start wherever you want. The cool thing about these modules is that they have this workbook that goes with them. So you can watch one part of the video, you can pause it, you can go look at the relevant section in the workbook, do a couple of the exercises there. They're going to prompt you to think through some of these things and then go back to the video. You know, it kind of struck me looking at the slides and listening to Kirsten and Charlotte talk about their approach. There are a lot of things in there that you might say, oh, well, that makes sense, but how do I do that? You know, how do I stop trying to rush in and save my family member who has this issue? Or how do I stop thinking about what I want to make the person do while they're talking instead of listening to what they're saying? Things that are easy to say that are harder to do. The point of these modules is to give you the tools with exercises to help you think through how to do those things. So let me show you a little bit how it works real quickly. So there's the entirety of the workbook. Okay, it's pretty big because here's how it works. It's got several sections. There's a section there that corresponds to each one of the 5 videos. And then there's some other content in there with stuff that Charlotte and Kirsten wanted you to know about. So you can find the entire workbook, the whole thing. You can download it by clicking here. Also, the whole thing is embedded in here. Don't get scared. It says 181 pages because that's got all 5 of those sections included. Now, let's say you wanted to just start from the beginning. Okay, if you were to go to the first one, making sense of things that don't make sense. Okay, again, each one of these pages, you can go back to the welcome page if you get lost and want to start over. These are the headings of the 5 sections. We're on this one, so it's blacked out. This is the video that goes along with this section, making sense of things that don't make sense. And then this is the workbook section that corresponds to it. So as you're watching the video, it'll make reference to things in the workbook, exercises you can do, places where it gives you prompts to write your own responses to whatever the question is, and it will lead you through the entire process. So you'll notice this workbook, for example, this is just the 21 pages that go along with this video. So there are 5 of them. You can go to any one you want. You know, let's say you wanted to skip to 3 to talk about communication. So here we are in 3, a separate YouTube video, and that section of the workbook, you can see how it corresponds. So one of the ideas that I was kind of alluding to before that is central to this is the whole thing is there and is available on demand. You know, you might sit down and go through the whole thing from beginning to end. you might do one section of it and think, oh, this isn't terribly relevant to me. And then a few months down the road say, oh, what was that thing I remember reading about that a few months ago? That seems like something I might want to think about. You can go back to it. You can change your responses to the things in the workbook as your situation evolves and as, you know, things change in your family and in your life. I just saw a question again here in the chat. Where do I get this? I'll just cut and paste. That's the URL right there. What if I want to purchase the workbook? You would have to pay me $0.00 because the good news is our friends at SAMHSA already paid for it. So you can't purchase like a fancy bound version with a cover. What you can do is go here, access the entire workbook, and here it is. You can, you know, print it, download it, what have you. The whole thing is free and available to anyone whenever they want to access it. No questions asked, no barriers.
Jeremy, good segue just to mention
Yeah, go ahead.
what people might value in terms of other assets, but just to cover that one-on-one opportunity again right now, because we're at 3:15 or so, or 4:15, before people start leaving, just to make sure.
Yeah, and I saw Charlotte mention that in the chat, so I thank you for reminding me. So one of the things that we're making available as part of this, you know, obviously you had got an overview of what the whole thing looks like in today's conversation. You can go to our website and interact with it, check out the videos, check out the workbook. Another aspect that we have available is some one-on-one time with Charlotte and Kirsten available to anybody who wants to avail themselves of that. We have a certain number of hours that we've provided. If you want help in figuring out how to navigate any of these workbooks or how to sort of implement it, or, you know, the best way to go about using it for your individual situation. If you have any questions about the content or any of the concepts that were covered either in today's conversation or in the modules online and want to ask them about it, you know, that's available too. So at the on the final slide here, you'll see their email addresses, so you can reach out to them directly. Of course, you can always reach out to us here at the CAFÉ TA Center to hook you up with them. But I just want to make it clear, we do have, as part of this effort, the ability for people to work individually with Kirsten and Charlotte. And so if that's something you'd like to avail yourself of, definitely either contact them or contact us and we will hook you up. So before I jump back to the slides, any other questions about like what this website looks like and where everything is? I guess I'll go and look in the chat and see if there are any.
You know what, Jeremy, I was thinking about is one of the powers of peer support is just sharing different resources that that people have, you know, the opportunity to see, and I love when families get together and we start sharing different resources, because what works for some might not work for others. And if we work to break down those silos and we share all the resources available, we got a shot with supporting a family's mental health. And I think that's what, you know, the power of peer support is we're there to support you as you figure out what's best for you and your family. Hey, Kirsten.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I was looking at the chat, and I do want to just make note of Stan asked a question of how do you hold on to hope on those really hard days? So I just wanted to address that quickly. And first of all, Stan, if you would have told me 8 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, we would be where we are today as a family, I would have asked if I could have had that in writing, because I wouldn't believe you. And I would have thought you really didn't know what really went on in my home if you told me we were going to be where we are today. But, you know, just being really intentional and knowing that, you know, mental health is so fluid as physical health. You know, it's on a continuum, and to keep doing what you're doing and looking for those resources that absolutely, it's a pure value that we believe everyone can live in wellness and live in their idea of recovery with a mental health challenge or illness. It's what we wholeheartedly believe. Yeah. I notice we have, oh, thank you. I also noticed Jeremy just put our emails directly in the chat as well. So we can be reached directly through that if you have a look.
I'm just looking to see what other questions, if any, we have. We had one question about other languages. That's not something we have available yet, but that would be great. So maybe one day in the future, we'll be able to do that. Okay. All right. Well, I don't see any other questions. Of course, if anybody has a question, feel free to put it in the chat or in the Q&A real quick before we.
Jeremy, just real quick,
Go ahead, John.
Tasha's comment, which sounds kind of a difficult challenge. Sorry to hear about that. And that's one of those you could really drill down very quickly. So Tasha, I hope you reach out to Charlotte and Kirsten and make use of that one-on-one time that they can maybe listen and help you think through some things, clarify and do their thing.
Yeah, yes. Oh, thank you. Kirsten's on top of that. Charlotte and Kirsten are with an organization called Robin Priest Live Your Truth and All In. And you see their website there, allinfamily.ca. Here's a good question in the chat that I probably, it'd be nice to hear from you guys about this as well. My short answer is yes. Is this information appropriate for young adult siblings supporting another sibling? What we tried to do in designing this was to make it so that the concepts were sort of universal. So if you think of it, oftentimes we say family and we say child and words like that, but kind of like Kirsten was saying at the beginning about, what family is to us is what family is to you. These same concepts would apply in pretty much any supporting relationship. So whether it's a sibling, a friend, any situation where there's a group dynamic where one or more people are in sort of a caregiving position, and then there's somebody in that dynamic who's dealing with the mental health condition, the concepts that are covered in here will be useful in managing that dynamic, no matter what the definition of that relationship is on paper. Wouldn't you agree with that, Kirsten?
Yeah, I would. And the one thing I would like to make note of, and I think it's obvious, but I do want to say it, is that these resources are not something that you would watch or share with the person you're supporting. They're very specific to the supporter and the caregiver. Charlotte and I also often talk about the forgotten child. So in our family units, we have the forgotten child, where all the attention at the time certainly had to go on the one that required the attention. And because the other child was staying within the lines and working hard to be perfect, we look back now, they were the forgotten child, and that did come back to haunt us as time went on. So if anyone wants to reach out and talk about that, that's something that we certainly recognize. And I would say if you have a mature sibling who is like 15 and up, I mean, that's a parent's call, but this would be interesting for them as well.
Yeah, I think that, and I was reading what Jane wrote, that NAMI has it for 14 plus, as long as it's accompanied by the parents, and we've had several young children come to our support groups, and they were there supporting their family member, and and often they're supporting their parents, and it's made a huge difference in their lives as well. And I think Kirsten was one of the workshops where a couple of the young people were speaking on it. I can't remember which one that was in the downloadables.
Yeah, we do have Liv speaking. Yeah.
Yeah, on one of them. Yeah, so in each of the workshops that we have, you hear Kirsten, but at the end of them, there's actual families sharing how this workshop impacted them and the change that they made in their lives. And one of the young people, she speaks on it as well.
Interesting question that just came in that I think is important to address. Both facilitators shared their loved one as well. What happens when a loved one keeps cycling through mental health challenges?
Well, you know, I also want to say that, like I touched on, mental health certainly is fluid, right? So is it perfect? Is it what we thought? Is it what we imagined? No, quite honestly, no. We always use the term bumpy is good. So, you know, it's not just, you know, recovery and wellness is not, as we know, it's not a destination that you arrive at and you've made it. So it's, you know, there's ups and downs. There's things that still absolutely come up in our world. That here's the key. We have to be really mindful and intentional not to go back to instantly feeling those feelings that we felt many years ago, because we also use the line, all is not lost in a day. You know, those gains, the momentum moving forward, sideways, those are still there and they're valuable, even when things are cycling and you know, episodes happen, life changes, hard things come up. That's all part of it. And if you believe and continue to work through it and realize that it's okay not to be okay at times, that's how I feel about it. Charlotte?
You know, I was thinking, I just wanted to say that line again, Kirsten, that bumpy is good. To be honest, both Kirsten and I had a bit of a bumpy summer, and we really had to work on our own self-care because parts of our daughter's stories impacted our mental health this summer, and we started to think about that piece around trauma as a caregiver. And so for my daughter, she went through where she was really struggling with her mental health, and I immediately went back to those worst case scenarios, those hard nights where, you know, I thought we were going to end up at the hospital, and it was impacting my mental health. And so when you hear that our life is perfect, it's way better than it was 13 years ago, but it's how you define perfect. And for me, perfect is she's still on this planet, and I'll take bumpy as good over the alternative was she didn't want to be here. So these workshops are just some tools to support you, the caregiver, so that when life is a little easier, you can enjoy it. And when life is a little harder, you got some tools to support yourself to work through it. Hey, Kirsten?
Yeah, and I'm looking at Anita just put in a question in the chat about her 12-year-old son and looking for resources for her 12-year-old son. The first thing I would say to family that I was working with is, as for a 12-year-old, I would be talking with my family doctor. That's kind of your first line of communication. Things aren't okay. I have some concerns. That's where I certainly would start. It also says here, Anita, you talk about your 22-year-old who has been through some mental health challenges as well. I'm not sure if it's appropriate or not in your family story, but wow, if 22-year-old was in a place where he could be a support to your 12-year-old because he's been there, I would tap into that. you know, I don't know if it's appropriate or if that's something that would work. I don't know your 22-year-old, but that's where my
But we
head
would, yeah, and Kirsten, I was just thinking, Anita, we would be happy to, you know, Kirsten would be happy to book some time with you to really dive into what's going on and see if there's some strategies that we can support you to consider.
Well, thanks for your questions, everybody. We're getting towards the end here, so there are a couple things I wanted to remind you of and let you know about before we run out of time. First of all, I'm glad that question came up about, you know, it seems like you've resolved your situation. What if mine's not resolved? Because one of the things we all know is that, you know, recovery is not a straight line where you go from not well to well. You go back and forth and up and down, and, you know, it's bumpy, as you guys were saying. And I think one of the reasons that we thought this was a good approach to have these things online for people is because you can return to it. You know, you might have a period where things are great, and then you might have a day where you feel like everything's falling apart. This gives you something to return to help you kind of think through those things. And ideally, that's how people will use it. But yeah, I strongly agree, Charlotte and Kirsten, that you can't expect everything to, you know, start out bad and get better and end up great and stay there, because, you know, that's not the human experience. So we're going to have, speaking of coming back, we're going to have, like that segue, we're going to have a couple other things where we're going to have Charlotte and Kirsten talking about us with family mental health coming up. So we have one scheduled for November and one scheduled for January. If you were here today, you signed up, so you're going to be on our email list. You're going to get some notifications when those come around. So please do come back and join us when that happens. And then here on the last slide, in case you missed it, I'll tell you this verbally so you don't have to rush to try to copy it or something. You can always find me. You can go to the CAFÉ TA Center website and contact us that way. You can email me at cafeTAcenter@gmail.com. Of course, you can also email Kirsten and Charlotte directly. Their addresses are both there and in the chat. And again, we do have some time set aside for attendees to be able to work individually with them. So if that's something that interests you, please do pursue that. I also should mention, if you're looking for the recording of this, you maybe missed the end or the beginning or want to share it with somebody, you can find it on our website, cafetacenter.net. That should be up there by tomorrow morning, just as soon as Zoom gets done processing the recording. So that's about it. I just want to say a big thanks to Kirsten and Charlotte for being here today. We really appreciate you. And of course, thanks to John, as always, for helping to manage that chat. I hope everybody has a great day, and we'll look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Stay well.